Tenebrous Tingles.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again or for the first time for Tenebrous Tingles. I'm Eve, and I'm here with Zandi and a lovely friend, Jack, who is going to help talk to us about Illinois.
Hi,
Say
Jack.
hi,
Hey,
guys.
hi. Good to be here.
Awesome.
Okay, so should we give spoiler alerts about what we're going to do or
Yes,
just
let's go
jump right into
ahead and let's let everybody know what we're going to be doing today.
it? Okay.
So, Eve, why don't you go first? Because Eve's going to be giving us two. She'll be giving us one at the beginning and one at the end. So, why don't you tell us what you're going to be doing, Eve?
Okay, so I've got a cryptid in Illinois, kind of an urban legend turned cryptid named the Corncob Man. And I have a ghost story that you may or may not have heard of. It's kind of a really traditional trope, but it's very well documented in Illinois of Resurrection Mary. So, how about you, Jack?
So, I will be discussing the hauntings at the Lincoln Park Zoo, specifically on the Lion House, the Ape House, and the barn they erected there in 1965. Uh, Content warning for those listening. This will involve the description of bodies being moved, the Great Chicago Fire, and some fairly unsanitary practices at the time. Zandi?
I'm going to be talking about the Ashmore Estates, which was a poor farm and then a psychiatric hospital, and it is considered one of the most haunted places in Illinois.
I can confirm.
Okay. So, I
Oh,
chose to work with a listener suggestion. So, we're going to give a thank you and a shout out to a fan that we've actually had from the very beginning, Leonard.
Hi,
He
Leonard.
asked, hi, Leonard. He asked to hear about the Corncob Man. And these stories are still told in Illinois. It's a suburb of Chicago. It was passed along orally for who knows how long since the area was settled. The details vary depending on who's telling the story, kind of what neighborhood you're in, and you'll also see later how it changes with the times with the relevant fears. Some just remember being warned to stay away from certain areas, and others remember the name by itself being enough to scare them into things like being home all the time or staying away from dangerous equipment. The Corncob Man is an urban legend in Addison. It shifts with the fears of the era and emerging as these stories seem to in a rural place surrounded by in between spaces that just kind of give you that eerie feeling like cornfields and empty roads or edges of towns, those in between quiet spaces that don't always feel so quiet. There is an argument to be made that it was just a way to give shape to the unease and explain relevant danger in a way that kids would understand. And we've seen that in other places. I think Alaska is one that comes to mind that, the cryptid there taught you valuable lessons about how to treat the water, how to treat the edges of water. And, while the cryptid may or may not have been real, I'm definitely not going to negate anyone's experience. The safety that believing in those stories provided was very real and necessary. So it put things in a way that could be understood in that way. The name is remembered collectively, sort of passed down casually as common knowledge there. It was local folklore with the variations I mentioned before, depending on the neighborhood um, and the different warnings that were needed. Folklore has those elements of warning. So whatever lessons, it was an urban legend turned local cryptid that someone actually decided to bring to life. And that one, it's kind of a bit of a separation. I'm going to call him the human unicorn because that's what the papers called him. And in my research, I want to say I was helped a great deal by a librarian at the Addison Public Library, Courtney, and of the Addison Historical Museum, I got to speak with Susan. So thank you so much to Courtney and Susan. They were really accommodating and kind in, sharing what they knew of the situation and their experiences with the space around them and the stories.
We appreciate you so much for helping.
We do. Not everyone will take a call from some stranger saying, "Hey, could you tell me about the local monster that is in your area? Do you think you could give me a minute of your time?" And they do. So I appreciate it.
They did. That was so lovely.
I mean, everyone has been nice. No one has been unkind to me. But yeah, lots of really nice people that have shared their stories with me. And it is weird to get a phone call from a perfect stranger asking about local, legends. And people have been really kind. And I'm loving the connective thread that this is kind of building in between there as well.
So thank you guys so much.
In the 60s, it was a well known story that kids told each other around campfires or at sleepovers or just while playing to freak each other out. They would try to scare each other with the Corncob Man will get you if you are alone or if you step outside the tents, or, the lessons shifted with the different stories, but they all had the corn cobs sticking out of the man's head in common. One specifically came out from his forehead like a unicorn, and then some of the stories had more coming out from the sides. It's pretty creative. I definitely don't know that I would have come up with that if given license to make a cryptid up. I don't know if I would have gone there, but this one did, and I love that.
I'm envisioning a crown of corn cobs at this point when you say others come out from the sides.
A crown. You know? Yeah, why not?
I mean, either you got unicorn or you get a crown of corn cobs, and either one is cool.
I could see
Yeah,
kind
I
of
mean,
deer horns
Yeah.
made of corn cobs.
okay, well, now I'm going to be picturing that throughout the day. Thank you, Jack. That's going to pop into my head all the time.
I just keep getting Frosty the Snowman in my head with a corn cob pipe and a button nose.
Oh, a corncob pipe does come in one of the variations.
Okay.
Um, so keep Frosty the Snowman in mind. That one. But in the earliest variation, it kind of helps to understand the environment at that time. Before 1950, Addison was a very rural, mostly farms. The population was less than 1,000 people. In this one, an ordinary man, a farmer, had an intense mishap with his larger equipment. And I know that they talk about what equipment it is in some of the stories, and maybe there's variations about what equipment it was big enough to be dangerous, and he got very, very hurt. He ended up being really decapitated. He survived, but was physically mangled and had some brain damage. And so his family was scared of him now. I don't know if his behavior changed a whole lot. I mean, he did have brain damage. He probably had some really scary scars, but they made him sleep in the barn and apparently did not visit him a lot. He would stuff his clothes with corn in order to keep himself warm, but he was really lonely. So that's where the corn came from. He got it stuck on him. I don't know how it ended up on his head, but maybe it was a corn hat. Because he wanted companionship so much, he would lurk in the cornfields with the corn sticking out of him and his clothing in various ways, and he would take children who came too close. Those children were never heard from again. So it was kind of a warning with the element of the reality of farm accidents mixed with fantastical elements to heighten the fear, to make it a more dramatic story. In another version, someone got really mad at a man and rammed a corn cob, or several corn cobs, depending on the enthusiasm of the storyteller, through his skull, but it did not kill him. I think we can all appreciate we've all handled a corn cob in one way or another.
Hmm.
I don't know what kind of rage it would take to ram a corn cob through a skull, but in the story, it was done. In the last version, in there was an old grumpy man who lived at the end of a spooky street. So it's kind of a small town scary cliche. He smoked a corn cob pipe, and when children would trespass near his yard, He would take them, and they were never heard from again. It had evolved to this version by the 1970s. And at that point, the town had a lot of rapid growth. There was probably still some farmland, but less farmland, a little bit more industrial in its, makeup. It had evolved to this version by the 1970s. So the relevant fears and warning had changed from when it had started. So these were all kind of the scary stories, no actual experiences that I could find, unless you count my sister's cousin's best friend swears she saw him. That just kind of it just comes along with urban legends. Someone saw it, but I mean, we can't really pinpoint who. Until about 1964, someone decided to bring the legend to life. In 1964, the local news bulletin editor and editor in chief actually had a disagreement about whether to run the story because they weren't sure if someone was pranking them with the original lore, understandably. Um, it was real sightings that had occurred. The sightings continued and the story ran. A man was dressing in a sheet, somehow getting corn cobs to stick to his face, which by itself is a little bit impressive, and he was jumping out at people to scare them. One corn cob was always sticking out of his forehead, and he was referred to as the human unicorn. He was also accused of tapping on windows to get people to look at him, or making a ruckus on front porches and then screaming at whoever came out to look. It's remembered as a time when children stopped having sleepovers and were generally more careful about walking alone, getting home before dark. The Addison Press even had a full page illustration of a man hiding in a tree. I did send that to Zandi. I don't know if that's going to be linked along with the story, but that would be pretty cool. Looking like a ghostly corn unicorn and holding a knife. I'm not sure if he really had a knife, but in the picture, he was given a knife for extra scariness, I guess.
Artistic interpretation.
And there's more argument about that later. There's some stuff about the paper. Yeah, there were a few more articles about the human unicorn still being on the loose. It ran in the paper kind of all that summer. I think my favorite story was when the newspaper it wrote a plea directly to the quote unquote monster. They had a story about he's still on the loose, make sure you're doing these things to protect yourself, et cetera, et cetera. And then it cut to this page where it, addressed him directly and said, quote, cut it out, stop scaring kids, you have become an unfunny problem, unquote. Found that kind of funny. He was eventually caught. No names, but it was determined that the person doing this, he was caught in the act. He had behavioral problems, and no charges were actually brought. So there was no punishment, but the police were, it's a small town. They were kind of like, we know who you are, knock it off, and, we'll just kind of forget this. And he did. He did it. In return, they kept his identity to themselves. And I think some locals probably know. I'm not going to put names here out of respect because some were given to me, and it's just, I sort of love that they came together and said, hey, we've got issues. We need you to figure out your issues and stop doing this. But they did not ruin his life. They hadn't hurt anyone. And, I think that outcome, that might have changed the outcome if he had, but I don't know. There was compassion shown in how it was dealt with. And I kind of appreciate that. And to this day, like, it's still kind of kept secret. They're like, we caught him, name is redacted. He moved on with his life. And again, yeah, he never hurt anyone. He was a menace, and it wasn't okay. He scared people, definitely okay, but no injuries. The story was recently rekindled because a man asked Susan at the museum for archival records about the Corncob Man. He did that because he remembered when he was in third grade not being able to sleep outside in his tent because the Corncob Man would get him. And I guess he just kind of wanted to, I don't know, look backward a little bit and see a new perspective on his childhood memory. The original newspaper articles were donated to the historical museum by someone who knew the assistant editor. Um, and there he was the photo editor, and there was a note included with the articles about sort of how he felt about the situation. He did not want to publish that picture or the stories because he felt that it wasn't credible. His boss overruled him, and the photo was put on the front page. Susan wasn't sure if his opinion ever changed because it did ask. He had passed, and she never spoke with him directly. So I don't know if it changed through the years about it because something was actually happening. It just, it wasn't what he thought. But the newspaper did end up losing credibility after that, and it no longer circulates today. There's a variety of reasons that that could be happening, though. The note said that Frank, the assistant editor, though, called that picture the beginning of the end. He believes that story was the reason the newspaper went downhill. But I mean, someone was running through the town, kind of scaring people. I feel like that's newsworthy. So maybe he didn't like the sensationalism of it. Courtney was talking about how, like, they have a little murder mystery at the library and a corncob man character in it. And, in doing the research about the corncob man and how character, and it kind of drew people out to say, oh, yeah, I remember that summer when we had to get home earlier than we had before. Or one man described, like, he was a teenager at the time. He described they would round up like a group of people. They called them C's to go and try to find the corncob man and stop him. So it was like I guess a bonding experience. They didn't find him, which I'm kind of glad because I think that might have gotten violent. They came together to do this, and it's a memory that they sort of share. Today, the stories of the human unicorn and the original lore of the corncob man have sort of blended together with locations and things. They're still a part of the town. He's not a mascot like we've seen in other places, like, Hug and Wally definitely comes to mind there. But people there do recognize the name. The library, yeah, I would has the yearly murder mystery. I don't know if the Corncob Man is going to be there every time, but he was last year, and they had a really good, response to that. You can still find people talking about it recently online, whether it's sharing variations of the spooky stories that they grew up with about the Corncob Man, or its memories of when the Unicorn Man was, wandering about. He still comes up and is recognized in conversation. Those things keep the legend alive, and that's what I've got for the Corncob Man. I think next up, we've got some heavier stories with Jack.
We do.
October 19, or sorry, October 1871, the Great Chicago Fire. Even those not from the Chicagoland area, from Illinois, from the Midwest, probably have some inkling of it. It was one of the worst fires in American history, starting at the southwest from the town center, what we now know as the Loop. It swept from the old Leary farm all the way north, crossing the river, jumping over it thanks to strong winds, poor rainfall all over that year.
That is so crazy that it just jumped across the river. I'm sure they expected
I,
the river to be a barrier.
they did. They expected it to be a barrier.
Was the river polluted at that point?
Oh, it was very polluted. Along the northern edge of the river was the butchering places, was the places where animals were carved up and made into what you would probably find on your dinner table. The Chicago River, I don't believe caught fire. It was simply that there was so much flammable material in the wind that when it swept from the southern shore's wooden buildings to the northern shore's wooden buildings, well, it just all caught fire very, very quickly.
So it was embers on the wind, not the water surface.
Exactly. They assumed that the distance would be enough to prevent it, but there was too many of them. And here's the thing is that the buildings were not just wooden, but they were tightly packed. The number of immigrants who had been arriving from the eastern shore to Chicago, because Chicago was a city growing, full of economic opportunity, but they could only afford these cheap, quickly built, fairly rickety and unsafe shanties, to be perfectly honest. Something that would unfortunately be repeated at Cabrini Green many, many years later. But for now, while the Chicago fire swept forward north, Lincoln Park, or what would become Lincoln Park, is the focus of our story today. Because before it was Lincoln Park, it was the Chicago City Cemetery, the sole repository for the dead, interred in their coffins, buried in the ground, their presence, their place, their name, and their life marked by wooden objects. And if you're of a certain mind, you might understand that these hot embers on the wind that had already jumped the river and made what would be the Gold Coast burn, well, they took to the wooden grave markers as well. And not just that, they took to the graveyard while it was in the middle of an over 10-year effort to move all of these bodies. When the fire came midway through the project, because doing the work, it was by hand, it was by cart and by horse, by shovel and pick and axe. So it was long and hard. And of course, you had to make sure you kept everybody accounted for. And unfortunately, the fire ruined that effort quite spectacularly. By the time the embers had died, on October 10th, there were 10,000 plus corpses now unaccounted for in the area that was Lincoln Park. There was no way to know where they were buried, who the bodies belonged to. And after such a devastating tragedy, the efforts to quickly rebuild the city with new rules, new laws, new standards to keep this sort of tragedy from ever happening again. Lincoln Park was built over these undiscovered unknowns. I am very, very sorry to the families, those who lost their loved ones in such a thing. Not just those who died in the fire, but those who had died and whose history had been stripped by the fire. It is for this reason that the Lincoln Park Zoo, the Lion House, the Primate House, the barn, these three locations have been known sightings of hauntings. And with 10,000 plus spirits, I am surprised it's not worse. You'll hear voices. One individual will hear a scream, and the rest of the group will have heard nothing. You hear begging and pleading, please look for me. Please take me home. Discussions with the dead have led to answers of who is there? There are many of us.
So they're intelligent enough to like you can speak to them and have a coherent conversation.
Are smart. Others are merely repeating things over and over. In particular, they tell any gentleman who've accidentally wandered into the women's lavatory to get.
Accidentally.
And some have theories as to why this is. Of course, there's the bodies in the ground, but it's been, well, it happened in 1871, and it's quite a bit on from then, over 150 years. The bodies would have well and truly decayed. And of course, there is the peculiar nature, the peculiar building of the bathrooms in the Lion House, which is mirrors on each wall facing one another. And some occultists theorize that mirrors in such a placement could confuse ghosts and cause them to become temporarily trapped, meaning that may be the source of the frequent and continued voices. But here's my theory, which is that the Lion House and the Primate House were both built in 1912. The barn itself was put up in 1956, I believe. I could be wrong about that. I apologize if I am. But that gives a period of almost 4 decades between each of these haunted locations, all of which are in close proximity to each other. Now, my thought is that there was a bur tree, a bur oak in the Chicago City Cemetery. It had been there when the settlers came. It had been there when the graves had been dug. It had been there when the fire occurred. But a bird tree is a plant native to the prairies, and it's adapted to handle prairie fires, of which this was very similar. And it was probably the only thing of the old city cemetery that survived that fire. It was probably the only thing that survived for quite a bit of Lincoln Park. And my thought is that I think that the spirits interred there and the ones who lost their lives in the midst of the fire may have gravitated towards that tree as a kind of replacement marker, as a living edifice to what they are. Often believe spirits are tied not just to their bodies, but to the places they lived, to the objects that they treasured in life. And it was not too many years ago, I believe in the year 2021, in November, that the bird tree met the end of its very long life. And in that time, I don't know if the hauntings have decreased or increased, but what I do know is that a new bird tree has been planted in the same spot using the scion saplings. So it is identical to the tree that came before. It is in the same soil that the original was. And I have to wonder, with this new tree as it grows, and as the rest of its saplings grow in the Morton Arboretum, how will that affect the infamous hauntings of the Lincoln Park Zoo? I think only time will tell. Go on a ghost tour. Tell us what you see. Tell us what you hear. But one word of warning. If something tries to tell you to look in the mirror, don't. It might pull you in.
These are very
This
specific
is,
mirrors, aren't they?
oh yes, the ones in the bathroom.
Inside the bathroom? Or you said they.
Inside.
Mm,
Are there actual stories? Then
yeah. Tell us about the mirrors.
are there
And.
Like I said, the mirrors are facing one another,
Yeah, but
and a lot of occult.
you said that people could get pulled in. Are there any actual reports of someone having been pulled in?
gone missing.
There's a few here and there, but some people
Yeah.
feel it. It might simply be vertigo that's causing it. The feeling of being drawn into those spaces. It, personally, I've never heard of anyone going missing, but maybe that's because we never hear from them again.
Hello, yes, I am missing. I would like to report myself. I am in the mirror. Thank you.
Well, you think that somebody would be with them. The only time I went to a zoo by myself was when I worked there. And
Yeah,
people would
same.
notice if I'm a visitor, I would probably have someone with me. They would notice. Hope. God, I hope that if I'm hanging out with someone, they would notice if I just didn't come back.
I gotta be careful about such things. I think really it's just, I believe the mirror story is actually fabricated. And not because there aren't ghosts there, there absolutely are. It got plenty to choose from, most from the Victorian era. Hence the rather firm rebuttal to any gentlemen who find themselves in the ladies' lavatory. But I've never heard of them hurting anyone, and I don't believe they would. I believe they're victims, and I believe that they're present there. I even thought that it's possible that they might have been given a release with the old trees passing, simply because it had passed on peacefully instead of as they did. But no, I don't believe you're in real danger in Lincoln Park Zoo.
Unlike the Ashmore Estates.
Oh yes, actually, let's talk about Ashmore
No, no, no.
Estates.
Continue. We're not done with you yet.
Uh,
Oh
very
my
well.
goodness.
But yes.
I believe you have a personal story for us, don't you?
Oh,
Oh
yes.
yes. So related to the fire, that was not the last fire to bother Chicago. Our brave fire departments deal with blazes of all kinds and all sorts all throughout the year. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Trust me, if somebody's going to do something foolish that starts a fire, the time of year is no barrier to it. But not everyone who goes into those fires or who does their job comes out safely. That's dangerous work. In my case, in my childhood home, there was a man who had died. The house had been rebuilt. He was a firefighter himself. I was told stories about it by the neighbors, and my brother liked to scare me with it. But I'd never heard or seen anything interesting. Sometimes it felt a little weird, but as a kid, as a kid with a nervous disposition, no less, I didn't think that was particularly strange. But then one day, when the house was empty but for myself, there's a closet on the first floor leading from the front door to the kitchen.
Jack, are you telling us that you were left home alone at age, what, 9?
Yes.
Okay, me too.
You were?
But still.
But yes, it was true. I was
I
left
was
home
like,
alone.
yeah, why is that weird?
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't really that long, to be honest. I think my mother had slept out for maybe half an hour to an hour. Groceries, chores, something like that. And I decided to
Okay,
stay
not
behind.
us. We were home alone.
Mm.
But in that short time, I walked to the closet. I don't know why. I think I was just bored and wandering around. And I opened the door, and there they were. It was the ghost. It wasn't some rotted, undead specter like you see in the movies. And it wasn't some strange, terrifying, screaming thing like you often see on TV. Oh, no, no, no. This one was quieter. I think he just stood there, as surprised as I was. In that awkward moment, he faded away. Like I had caught him. Like I had surprised him. But I was never afraid, which is very strange.
Weirdest babysitter ever.
Was I was afraid of many things back then. Of dogs, the dark, of inanimate objects, figures that looked too much like a person, or sometimes didn't look enough like a person.
So you've
And
seen
yet,
other things, other figures.
and yeah, yes, and then despite all that, this great, massive thing, this swirling eddy of colors and sensation and shape, briefly looking like a person, did not frighten me. Did not frighten this 8-year-old child. No, it was simply left with a feeling of awe and calm. And I hope that more spirits can reach that kind of place.
Was he wearing like a fireman's uniform, or
No,
describe him to me?
that was it. He was this great big humanoid shape of colors.
What
It
colors?
wasn't like he, honestly, I think it was mostly the colors of flame, the
Okay.
reds, the yellows, the oranges, that sort of vibrant hue. But it wasn't the crackling flicker of flame. It wasn't the match or the candle hovering there gently. It was more like
Sunlight?
a neon sign person. Well, sunlight too. When you stare at something, a bright light, and you close your eyes, and there's that odd amorphous shape hanging there in the darkness. It was like that. So maybe it was I didn't see him at all. I simply saw what had been there, hovering in the air until it faded away. An echo. Yeah.
We're gonna have you back to describe some of your other experiences at some point because
Uh, great.
we're gonna have you back
Just
anyway, so it doesn't matter. You'll
uh,
be here for other
uh,
things, but we definitely need to have you back to describe some of your other experiences.
all right. I'll talk about the ghost dog at some point.
We will be
And
talking about a ghost dog in Tennessee, so you will definitely need to tell us about that one.
all right. Anyway, I think That's about as far as I can go with that. I never got haunted again. There was no repercussions. There was no screaming, no noises, or anything like that. I think I just caught him hiding. He was very embarrassed by it. That seems to be the most likely thing.
Maybe.
Or maybe you're right, and my mother hired a ghostly babysitter. That's
Maybe it
handy.
was after your brother tried to scare you about him. He's like, see, I'm not scary.
I never thought about that. But you might be right.
That's kind of sweet.
Yeah.
Then again, as a fireman, that feels pretty likely. They're not they're not the type who want to scare people.
I no, I like the idea of him being like, see, I'm not scary after your brother tried to scare you about him.
Anyway,
All right.
Zandi, it's your turn to do Ashwood.
Ashmore.
Wait, Ashmore, sorry.
Yep. So we're going to talk about the Ashmore Estates, which are in Ashmore, Illinois. So just to give a quick overview, Jack told us earlier that the Coles County Poor Farm near Ashmore, Illinois, actually existed prior to the Ashmore Estates timeline. And he said it
Mhm.
was built about what year? 1850, what, two?
It was about 1852, and then the estates, I believe, came later after it was purchased by the city. Or
He said that there was an ordinance, a state ordinance that happened in,
oh,
what,
yes, yes,
1909, and then they sold the Coles County Poor Farm in 1911. Okay.
yes. They were attempting to update and modernize mental health care, and apparently it did not quite meet the standards they had set.
So the Coles County Poor Farm was built near Ashmore, Illinois in 1916. So this would have been after.
Yes, this would have been after it. I believe it was an addition to the original grounds.
Okay.
It served much the same purpose as the prior, just following the rules of the state better.
Right, a more modern facility.
Mhm.
So what a poor farm is that it is a place where the indigent, poor, elderly who have no one to caretake them, no one to take care of them, the disabled and the mentally ill were given housing, and they would work outside, usually in a sort of farming area where they would have vegetables and other crops and chores and things to do to give them a sense of purpose as well as to help support themselves. It was considered healthier for people to have this sense of purpose and to have a job. Not necessarily a job like a 9 to 5, but duties to keep them occupied, busy, to feel like they were contributing. That was considered healthier. These poor farms were not punitive. They were not like the incarcerated states of the mentally ill or the poor that you had prior to this. This was not something that was done to. It was not like it was not like imprisoning the poor, like you see in, say, the old Robin Hood cartoon movie, right? Where when you can't pay your taxes, you get put in jail. This isn't that. It was meant to house and feed and take care of those who could not otherwise take care of themselves. So this was meant as a very charitable sort of thing. However, in any kind of facility like this, you are going to have overcrowding. You're going to have a lack of money. You're going to have people who get into who get into it for the wrong reasons, who want to take advantage of those who cannot defend themselves more easily. So you're going to have some negativity in any sort of situation like this. You are
To put it
also,
simply,
say that again.
the place became overcrowded. Overcrowding leads to hygiene issues. A lack of funding leads to issues of solving either of these things.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
and the hiring
Human error.
practices go downhill when there's a lack of funding as well.
Exactly. And all of these are what led to the Reformations later on.
Later on, right?
But yes.
So this was started in a very good mindset, a very charitable and positive mindset, but there are still going to be some negative outcomes there. Residents did work on the farm. The medical care is very minimal, even by the standards of the time, which was, like I said, 1916 through 1950s. So there were a number of deaths there, most of them due to old age or illness, that sort of thing. Not a lot of violent deaths occurred at this time, but it was the early 1900s. There was there were deaths that happened. Healthcare was just not at the standard that it is today, and we can't really hold the time period accountable by modern standards and what we consider appropriate. And it should be that we should be always moving forward. We should be always trying to better our society and to do better by the people that are under our care.
I agree.
In the early 1950s, the poor farm system was phased out. The building became a psychiatric care facility, but the records of this era are very limited, which fuels some speculation that in the 1950s there was some very negative practices going on in the mental health ward.
So they weren't like lost to a fire. They were simply just not there.
They are simply not there, but the place was abandoned for a very, very long time. So it could be that the records were taken out of the building by trespassers. It could be that they just got destroyed by time and damp. It could be that they were turned over to a library or other government facility and just lost. It's not really clear, but there are very few records from the era. And that does fuel a lot of speculation that there were some abuses that were occurring. Also, the fact that it was only a psychiatric care facility for about 5 years. Because in the late 1950s, it was closed permanently and abandoned. And I could not find why.
They just picked up and left with no reason?
Apparently. And I don't know whether they just ran out of money or whether there was some sort of negative press going on or something bad happened that they covered up later. I don't really know what happened, but all I know is that it was only a psychiatric care facility for about 5 years, from the early 1950s to the mid to late 1950s. So like 5 to 8, something like that.
Okay. It is, well, speaking as a longtime Illinois resident myself, the likelihood of the bureaucracy taking the records and then misplacing them somewhere else is a fairly high chance, to be perfectly honest. There's also a good chance that documents were either forged and then declared inadmissible. It could be that records were simply never kept of certain illicit and negative activities. But again, this is all speculation.
Yeah.
Without hard evidence, it is difficult to say exactly what happened. We only know, well, as you've told me, we only know what came after it closed, and what's still there now.
That is very true. So we don't really know what occurred there. We do know that there were several practices at the time period that were not necessarily very positive for psychiatric patients in general. This was a time where lobotomies were still occurring. This was a time where if you didn't obey appropriately the authorities in your life, you may be committed. This was a time where experimentation was going on that would not be considered ethical today. So I don't like to judge past peoples by current standards, but I feel like having ethics and empathy is not only a modern thing, and that there have been people
No.
throughout history that have had ethics and empathy and who have spoken out against certain practices. And I am not saying that these bad things happened at this facility. I don't know. But I do know that they did happen at this time period. And there are still some bad things that are happening today. There's always going to be negative people.
It is important to recognize that the practices themselves could be cruel and inhumane. And I believe it is because it came from a place of wanting to correct the individual rather than help the individual. And that's still something that we deal with today. That's still that mindset, not to make someone healthier, but to make someone more appropriate, more correct, more
Palatable.
pleasant.
Or just more quiet.
Mm.
All right, so to get back on track, between the 1960s and the 1990s, the building is vacant. There was vandalism, trespassing. The building had fallen into a state of disrepair and decay. But that's when the local rumors began. There was no widespread haunting reputation yet, but locals were starting to say, I went into this building and I saw this, or I heard this, or something happened. Now, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, this is when the urbex started to get really popular. People would go in with recording devices, cameras. You know, by the early 2000s, you've got cell phones. So,
The urban explorers.
yep,
Yes,
the
yes.
urban explorers, it became really big. And they started showing photographic evidence, auditory evidence, and a lot more reports about strange experiences that they had when they broke into this place, because let's be honest here, they were breaking in. And the early stories were saying that there were voices, there were shadow figures, there were unexplained noises, and it started to get a regional paranormal reputation. In 2006, it was purchased by private owners and it was renamed to be the Ashmore Estates. The first organized paranormal investigation started taking place between 2006 and 2010, and activity reports increased sharply, of course, because there's more visitors and more awareness. Some of that is going to be people expecting a haunting when they go in. That's the case anywhere. When you expect something, you set yourself up to experience something, whether or not you actually do, because the human mind is a very interesting place. In the
Well, not
20
mine.
In the 2010s, it was featured on ghost hunting TV shows and paranormal websites. Became known statewide as one of Illinois' most haunted locations. And there are reports of intelligence responses becoming more and more common.
Now, what do you mean by intelligent responses?
Okay, so like when Eve asked you about whether or not whether or not the ghosts responded at the Lion House to what you're asking them, or if they're responding to input from you, or whether they are just repeating the same phrase over and over again, whether or not anyone is there to see it. So you've got residual versus intelligent. Residual
Oh,
haunting would be when it's like the gray lady of certain colleges, where you see a figure that walks back and forth, and everybody has seen this figure walk back and forth, but she doesn't interact. She doesn't recognize. She doesn't note that there are people there trying to talk to her. She just it's residual. It's like an echo, a hologram. It's not going to respond. Whereas
so the Halloween decorations with the motion sensors
exactly,
activated. Right.
exactly. Whereas
That's
an
the
intelligent haunting, if you say what's your name, they may respond with their name, or if you say how did you die, they may respond with how they died, or if you say knock twice, you may hear knocking. Those are considered intelligent because they respond to outside stimulus.
okay. Okay. So there are intelligent entities at this location.
Yes. From the 2020s to currently, which is still the 2020s, it has been operated as a controlled paranormal and a historic site. There are hosted tours, overnight investigations, and private bookings. It continues to rank among the most haunted places in Illinois when compared to the McPike Mansion and the Old Joliet Prison. And in fact, it is considered one of the most haunted places in the United States, which are two of the other strongly haunted locations in the state. Commonly reported activity is children's voices and laughter, shadow figures, footsteps, knocking, doors opening and closing, cold spots, intense feelings of being watched, equipment malfunctioning. You can visit with permission. You can book one of the paranormal tours. You can stay overnight. Obviously, you can't trespass. I mean, it is a business at this point.
Yes, we here at Tenebrous Tingles do not encourage anyone to trespass or engage in deity.
Yeah, don't break into anywhere, even if it's a place that doesn't have or doesn't allow you to visit. Don't.
I don't care how interesting it is. Don't do that.
No, don't
Be
do that.
respectful.
Yes, that is our big thing. Be respectful of the living, of the dead, of the environment. Just be respectful.
Especially the dead. You can't prosecute the dead for what they'll do to you.
That's true. But also, just remember that these were people. And whether or not you believe in ghosts, you can be respectful of the fact that people lived, died, suffered, and existed in these places. And that deserves a certain level of, to be repetitive, respect. So just please be respectful.
Yeah.
Yeah, the memory is worth treating
Yes.
with care.
Yes, if nothing else. So some of the specific reported encounters at Ashmore Estates, like I said, children's voices is the most common reported occurrence. Investigators say that they hear very clear laughter, they hear whispering, they hear tiny footsteps and running on the upper floors. EVPs have been captured of childlike responses. These sounds occur when the investigators are alone or when they are in groups. So this does not require being alone for this to happen. There is the basement shadow figure. Multiple people have described a tall, dark silhouette in the basement. He's seen standing at the end of hallways or near doorways most commonly. He is frequently associated with feelings of dread or nausea. Some claim it reacts negatively when acknowledged, and we'll go into that further in a few minutes. There have been door interactions where heavy doors have reportedly slammed, opened slowly on their own, and even locked people inside rooms temporarily. These events happen most frequently during questioning, which fuels some of the intelligent haunting ideas. There are also physical sensations that occur, such as being touched, poked, pinched, or brushed against, having hair or clothing tugged or pulled, sudden pressure against the chest, like a feeling of being squeezed or like someone sitting on your chest. Cold spots appear suddenly and disappear just as fast. Hearing disembodied footsteps, especially pacing above or behind you, and when you turn to look, there's no one there. Some reports say that the footsteps match their own pace and then stop abruptly when you turn. There are visual apparitions.
Trolling you.
What?
They're just trolling you for fun.
Yeah, I mean, I would. I'd be bored. I'd do it. In my armor from previous episodes.
Obviously.
Because
In your armor.
Oh, yeah. Jack, I thought you've been listening.
Oh my, busted.
Seriously.
Come. Keep going.
Okay. So, of the apparitions that are seen, the aforementioned shadow figure in the basement, there are also small apparitions of children standing in the hallways and a woman in period clothing near stairwells. Figures usually vanish when they are looked at directly. There have been EVPs recorded. They get names. They get usually one-word answers. They answer direct yes or no questions. Batteries drain very quickly in the equipment, which is the most frequent complaint about the malfunctions of the equipment when they're there. They do get aggressive responses, emotional responses as well. So, feelings of sudden anger or panic, feelings of dread, of being watched, of feeling like you're not welcome. There have also been reports of equipment being knocked over, loud bangs following provocative questions. And this is why they advise do not taunt the spirits during your sessions. I mean, don't be that dude.
You are not tougher than the ghost.
I don't care how tough you are. Just don't be that dude.
Yeah, it's just kind of icky behavior.
It really is.
I was going to say this is part of why we're cautioning against breaking and entering.
Yeah.
That and the taunting thing is both.
It's just
You're either breaking
cool.
into somebody's home or you're insulting them in their own home. Neither of these things will make the ghost like you very much.
No. Just don't be that dude. So things that they have noticed is that most encounters do happen during interactive sessions. So again, with the intelligent responses, and it increases at night. So you're going to have more of a response if you go for one of the overnight sessions than when you go for the guided tours during the day. So we're going to go through the locations and what is most common in these different locations. We're going to start when you first enter the building, the main entrance / front hall. The reported activity there is the sudden temperature drop as soon as you enter. So it would be like being in the South in summer and walking into an air-conditioned house. Like just that sudden wall of cold, which is blissful and wonderful. I'm not sure about when it's involved with ghosts, but probably not as blissful and wonderful. There is a feeling of being watched immediately upon entering, and it does come with a very heavy and oppressive atmosphere, which kind of puts pay to the idea of it being blissful and wonderful. So, not really great like going into an air-conditioned house in the middle of summer.
It's probably more like going from the basement to the meat locker.
Yeah, probably. Many people say that the energy change as soon as they cross the threshold, as if the building notices new arrivals. All right, we're going to go with the upper floors and then break it down into the former resident rooms. The reported activity here is children's laughter and whispering, the light footsteps pacing the hallways, EVPs responding to questions, doors opening or closing slowly. This is where most people have encounters with the child spirits. And activity here is usually persistent and unsettling, but not aggressive. So the kids are not aggressive. The spirits upstairs are not really aggressive at all. And they're there. They react. They notice you. You see them, but they're not out to get you. Then there's the hallways. The reported activity here is shadowy figures crossing from one doorway to another. Not shadow people, just apparitions. Footsteps matching the investigator's pace. Voices calling names from behind you. It will be the investigator's names, by the way. So if they're walking behind Eve, they will say Eve. And when you turn around, there's nobody there.
Aww.
Hallways are transition spaces. It's where people most often see partial apparitions or figures, and they vanish when you focus on them. So the people crossing. So the most famous presence at Ashmore is a child. They are usually experienced laughing, whispering, and running. There are EVPs with childlike voices, most often a figure who says his name is Tommy. This is where you see the small figure, like I said, the small figures in the hallways or the rooms on the upper floors. So the former residence rooms, the hallways, the upper floors. The Ashmore house it did house families and children during the Poor Farm era. So these spirits are usually described as being curious, playful, or sad. They are not aggressive. Then you've got the stairwells. The activity there is the feeling of someone standing just above or below you on the stairs. a feeling of sudden dizziness or anxiety. Apparitions are seen on the landings, the most common being a woman in period clothing who is thought to be a nurse or other caretaker at the facility. Someone who was hired to work there when it was in its poor farm area, sort of a den mom kind of thing, I guess. I don't know how better to describe it as a nurse or caretaker for the people who lived and worked there, and she was a hired person. But I don't know that for sure. Nobody does. She could have just been one of the inmates of the poor farm. It's not really clear because they don't really know who she is. She is a classic apparition in that she is visible, she is recognizable, she is dressed in the same clothing every single time, but she is see through. She is not solid. People do not think that she is a real person dressed in period clothing like that they hired to work there.
Does she interact, or is she more of a like a lingering remnant?
She is a lingering remnant. They see brief visual sightings standing near stairwells or the doorways on the landings. She vanishes when approached, but she does not interact or respond. So she's more of a residual haunting. Then we go downstairs to the former medical and treatment areas. The activity here is the equipment malfunctions, the very sharp cold spots. So these are going to be almost like the idea of the orbs that kind of pass, like the light orbs or something, but these are not visual, they are cold spots. So they are small, compact things. It's not like walking under a vent or something where you feel a cold blast of air. This is something that isn't, it's too localized to be environmental.
Do you know about how big they?
I don't. It just says that they are small, sharp, cold spots.
Okay.
So I would
Oh,
guess about the size of, like, say, a basketball, that sort of thing, because it's said that it's not big enough to be environmental, like if you would walk under a vent. So
it would. Yeah, that would make sense. If it was too small, it'd be easier to miss. And if it was too large, it would.
you could write it
Well,
off as being environmental. Yeah.
having sort of somewhere between a person's torso, that size, hanging in the air, so that only some of your body experiences that intense cold. I could see how that'd be quite frightening, especially if you were unaware of it.
Yeah. So they also have a feeling of emotional sadness and heaviness, just feeling pulled down, drained, sad, heavy, depressed. There are EVPs there tied to pain or fear. Um, Even skeptics say these rooms feel different, that they feel emotionally draining. Like when you walk from upstairs, downstairs, even if you're not a believer, you feel just a wave of emotional pressure. And that is kind of unique to this area. So there are the isolation slash side rooms. The, the reported activity here are doors locking or sticking, panic or feeling claustrophobic, loud knocks on walls, feeling touched or grabbed. Most people cannot last very long in these rooms when they're by themselves. The reactions here tend to be physical and emotional, not visual. So you're not seeing the apparitions that you see upstairs or downstairs, because this is the main floor, but you feel things emotionally and physically. And then we go down to the basement, which is the most intense area. There is a strong feeling of dread or nausea. There are aggressive knocking or bangings. There's a feeling of being chased or threatened, kind of like that feeling you get sometimes, like when you're at the bottom of the stairs and you turn off the light and you run up the stairs before the thing can get you. It's that feeling, but not just you being a kid trying to escape the darkness. Maybe that's not universal, but yeah. So In the basement, there is the basement shadow man. This is your standard shadow person. This is not a shadowy apparition.
So, for me, who is unfamiliar with some of these terms, could you describe a shadow man a
Okay,
little bit?
so the idea of a shadow person is different than the idea of an apparition or a specter. This is Some people consider them to be alternative dimensional beings. They often have a very distinctly negative presence. These are figures that are reported very frequently when people have night terrors or when they are
Oh,
hospitalized or when they are feeling especially weak. Um, People who suffer from temporary or permanent paralysis often have responses to shadow figures. Um, and like I said, these tend to be very different than just your standard apparitions. They are often they the Hat Man is considered a shadow person. People have again people who have been in weakened mental states or physical states have also had um, visions of a specific shadow person wearing a large hat. So the Hat Man and then various other shadow people, it, it's it's something that's pervasive. It's not just in this one location, but it does seem to be when people are under some sort of mental or physical duress or having night terrors or that sort of thing, because it is a very negative encounter with the shadow persons. They are considered to be harmful,
They're scary.
negative, scary, and a lot of people consider them to be extra dimensional rather than haunting, if that makes
so
sense.
something is in the basement of these properties.
Something is
It's
in the
tight.
basement with these properties, and this could be a shadow figure, a shadow person, or it could just be a negative presence that people associate with a shadow person because it is negative, scary, harmful. And I'm not sure which. I've never been there. I don't, and it's, I mean, how do you determine? It's not like you can classify these scientifically. There's no, you can't say, well, this is a mammal, this is a reptile, this is, it doesn't work that way. So it's hard to classify.
I don't think we'll be doing an autopsy of a shadow person anytime soon.
No, between a shadow person and a harmful ghost or a negative ghost is kind of like, it's hard to do yet.
I think the best way that I would put that then is that a shadowy figure is simply a person's ghost, which is difficult to observe, and a shadow person is probably not a person at all, but simply something that looks like one.
Right. So a lot of people believe that shadow figures, shadow people were never human.
I mean, predators do try to mimic their prey to get closer.
And there is a reason why humanity as a whole has this whole idea of uncanny valley. But I don't want to get into that right now because that is
Oh,
a little
that's
bit
a
conspiracy theory-ish on my part.
that's a big topic we could cover. But let's focus now
Yeah, we're going to
on
focus now on the basement and the specific basement shadow
the
figure.
spooky basement.
Right. So he is described as being tall, dark, he is an intensely dark. Whereas, like some of the apparitions upstairs, they are shadows, but they're more transparent, translucent. Shadow, but light passes through them. You can see the other side. This figure is dark. It is, and I don't mean just ominously dark. I mean, light does not pass through the shadows of this apparition. He has no facial features. He is often seen watching from doorways or the end of corridors. His behavior is said to trigger fear, nausea, and panic, which are all anxiety responses. Like you get nauseated when you are anxious for a lot of people. He does react when he is acknowledged, and he does not react positively to being acknowledged. It's not a, oh, hey, they see me, hi. No, he doesn't want you to see him. He does not, he's going to react negatively to being spotted. So if you see him, it's probably best to pretend you don't.
What's an example of his negative reaction? Do you get rushed?
I will get
Or
into that in a little bit. I will go into some details about this in a minute. But for right now, we're going to say that he is considered territorial and intelligent. And he is the spirit or entity that investigators are usually the most cautious around or about. And he is the one that people are warned to be more careful with. So, the last place we're going to talk about as far as locations go is the outside grounds. And it's not specifically the outside grounds. Like, people aren't seeing ghosts running around outside. What they're seeing is apparitions appearing near the windows and voices that are kind of heard even though no one's inside. Lights appearing in the upper windows. So, these aren't specifically something that you see outside. It's that when you're looking at the building, you can see apparitions or lights or hear voices that are coming from inside the building, but you can visualize them when you are outside. They are not confined to one room, so it's not a specific window where you see a light every single time. It's that it happens in multiple windows, multiple parts of the building that you can see from outside. So that's a quick overview, not so quick overview of the rooms and everything. And I'm going to give you some specific examples of sessions and reports that there have been. One is where a small group of investigators were sitting quietly on the second floor. The lights were off. They weren't using EVP. They were just listening. And they heard running footsteps. They clearly passed them in the hallway. There were no creaks or pops, just running, little feet running. One person whispered, "There are kids here, aren't there?" And immediately a child's laugh echoed into the distance, and then it was silent again. They checked the hallway. There was no one. There was no drafts. There was no animals. There was nothing there. I mean, obviously, a draft is not going to make a child laugh, but apparently the kid thought it was funny. So that's cool. Another group of investigators went to the basement. There was a person, one of the investigators went alone into the basement for a few minutes. He said that he felt intense nausea almost immediately. He described feeling of pressure on his chest, like anxiety for no reason. He saw a dark figure standing near a doorway, and he said, "I see you," and then a loud bang hit the wall right behind them. He left the basement shaking and refused to go back down that night. Which, I mean, yeah.
Right? No, I'm not
see.
doing
So
that.
there's your answer.
I don't
When
know why
someone
he's
says,
staying in the
"I see you,"
building.
he's like, bang. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, that's
gone, actually. I'm not staying in the building. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Go back upstairs with the kids because no.
No, those kids are fine. I'm leaving the entire place. Maybe the state.
But it is interesting about Ashmore, though. It has these tiered levels of intensity,
It does.
almost like the evil and the dread is sinking downward, and the goodness is kind of lifting up to the top.
It is an interesting take on it, and I kind of love that it's evil sinks to the bottom. All right, so there was a second basement confrontation. It was a group of 3 experienced paranormal investigators who were doing an overnight study. They were in the basement and the first floor, and it happened around 9 p.m. They started setting up their equipment. They said the initial activity was minor. They were getting whispers, footsteps, occasional cold spots. Around midnight, one of the investigators volunteered to enter the basement alone for an EVP recording. They also had an immediate physical reaction. They said that the moment they stepped down the stairs, the air became oppressive, cold, and heavy. It went far beyond normal basement temperatures, like far colder. They reported seeing a tall black shadow at the far end of the basement, completely still but unmistakably human. They said they felt an intense feeling of dread. They felt nauseated. They felt like the entity was targeting them specifically, and they described it as a presence that didn't want me there. They tried to leave. A loud slam echoed throughout the basement. Footsteps began approaching them from behind, matching their own movements. The shadow seemed to move closer, even though no one else was in the room. So it wasn't like somebody else's shadow. It wasn't the shadow of somebody walking in an adjacent room or anything like that, because there was no one else down there. They said that their flashlight began to flicker, their cameras were malfunctioning, there were voice recorders that were filled with static that wasn't there, that they couldn't hear audibly. The investigator ran back up the stairs, visibly shaken, refused to return downstairs for the rest of the night. They stayed with their friends. They were not going by themselves again. They were not going back down there. The remaining team reported there were footsteps that they were hearing from the basement, even though no one was walking around down there at the time. The EVPs recorded from the session included whispered words "go" and "leave," and names that they had not spoken aloud. So these reporters, I don't know their names. It's not said because they kept a certain level of anonymity. But let's pretend like their names are Jim, Mary, and Bob. And they did not speak their own names while they were there. But the EVPs picked up whispers of Jim, Mary, Bob. Everyone agreed it was the most intense activity they had ever experienced anywhere, not just at Ashmore, but certainly they had done other investigations at Ashmore, and they said it was more intense than anything they experienced at Ashmore previously. It does stand out because it came with visual, physical, emotional, and auditory phenomena simultaneously. Many different paranormal teams suggest that Ashmore's basement feels alive, and it is unlike residual hauntings in other locations. After this, they restricted future overnight encounters to 2 people, never alone. So you are not allowed to go down to the basement alone if you go to Ashmore now.
Even if you wanted to?
Even if you wanted to. So the EVPs. All right, because Eve always asks me, what did the EVPs capture? What did the EVP, and I normally don't know, but I do this time. So,
Yay.
yeah, so I actually took into account Eve's earlier questions from earlier episodes about what is captured on the EVPs. Now I know what are captured on the EVPs here. So we'll go through this. Tommy is captured pretty frequently. He is associated with a childlike voice. He often comes through after questions like, who's here with us? Is there a child here? And he is usually on the upper floors. It's usually a soft, quick answer, and it's close to the mic. So he leans in to whisper his name or to say yes or hi or I'm here. And then we have Mary, and she is the most often heard female voice. It's sometimes whispered, sometimes spoken clearly. She comes up near the stairwells or the hallway, so she may be the lady in period clothing. She may be a different lady. Some investigators think she could be a former resident or a caretaker figure, but there's no hard documentation either way, but she does give her name as Mary. Then there is William. He is reported during sessions in the lower level areas, like the medical rooms or the isolation wards. He has a deeper, more forceful tone. Sometimes he follows questions about authority or supervision. So they think that he is linked speculatively to an authority presence, somebody who was in charge at some point there. There are investigator names that are come up. Like I said, when I mentioned Jim or Bob, even though they don't say their names, the spirits will respond with their names, specifically like, "Do you know who we are?" or "Who is here with us?" They will say the investigators' names. So that would be like, "Do you know who we are, Eve?" I didn't tell you my name was Eve. So that it would be something like that. I mean, obviously, I'm using Eve as an example because she's here with me. So it could be Zandi. It could be, yeah. This one really rattles people, especially if they don't say their name. Like, "Hi, I am Zandi. Who else is here with me?" And they repeat Zandi. That wouldn't be kind of weird. But if I don't say, "Hi, I'm Zandi," and I don't say my name at any point during the night, and they're like, "Zandi is here," uh, who says? How do you know that? How do you know me? So, yeah, that would be most commonly, "Do you know who we are?" or "Who's here with us?" There are also a lot of single word responses. These come up more consistently than names, and they are "go," "leave," "no," "mine," and "help." You do not get "help" in the basement, but "go," "leave," "no," and "mine" happen most commonly in the basement and side rooms. It's very rarely full sentences like, "I want you to leave." It's just "leave." Most responses do happen immediately after a question. So it's not out of the blue. It doesn't happen a time later. Like, they don't say, "Who's here with me?" And then, like, 5 minutes later, you get Eve. It doesn't happen like that. It's very quick. You get the children's names on the upper floor. You get the adult male names in the lower levels. So the vertical progression that Jack mentioned is actually mentioned again, is one of the reasons that it stands out um, very differently for other investigators as being a unique place, is because they experience different types of phenomena depending on where they are, and that the basement is the most aggressive, intimidating presence, whereas the upper floors are the lighter activity and lighter voices. And that is the Ashmore Estates. To end on a slightly lighter note, Eve, you have one more for us. Is that true?
I do. How do you know mine's light, though?
Can it be much darker than the Ashmore Estates?
No, it's not at all. Not
Also,
at all.
because it's you. So, yeah, the last
So,
time you went dark, we had to do that as a Patreon episode. So
right? We went way past dark.
we
My bad.
did. We did. Yeah.
So, Jack, you may actually be kind of familiar with us. It's in your area. There's a road in Justice, Illinois, that has a long history of a vanishing hitchhiker for nearly a century now, like, yeah, 90 years. A young woman in a white dress, an evening gown from the more descriptive experiencers, stopped travelers along Archer Avenue and politely asked for a ride. Resurrection Cemetery is also along that road, and when the car reaches it, she disappears. No one has been hurt in any of these stories, and she is somewhat affectionately known as Resurrection Mary. So, are you familiar with the story, Jack?
It is something I heard a lot more as a kid and less as I grew up. And, to be honest, sometimes people changed which graveyard she was at. Usually it was whichever one was closest to me. They would talk about that one as if that was where the hitchhiker ghost was.
So, there specifically just is a long line of people in your life that try to scare you particularly.
For some reason, it's just a fun pastime for them. I think they liked making the twitchy guy jump.
Well, she is consistently described as a demure, blonde young woman in possibly her mid 20s. She's been described, as a late teenager as well, dressed as if she'd just come from a dance. There are a lot of sightings that have been documented, and many others that are only vaguely alluded to, like just something that everyone knows about there, whether they've had an experience or not. The earliest stories, though, go back to the 1930s when a young woman was killed in a car accident on Archer Avenue coming home from a dance that was being held at the O. Henry Ballroom. It was later called the Willowbrook Ballroom, and then was later than that destroyed by a fire in 2016 and has been redeveloped into apartments in 2023. So there's no lingering traces anymore. After the car accident, the sightings began. Her identity has not been concretely confirmed. The two young women who have been mentioned as possibilities, who kind of are referred to, are Mary Bergovi and Anna Norcus, due to their physical descriptions and their deaths fitting the time frame and situation. It's more commonly believed to be Mary. Still, no historical record conclusively identifies the ghost as any specific person. One version is that she and her date had a and she stormed out. She wasn't paying attention. When she went to cross the road, just leaving the place mad, she was hit by a speeding car on Archer Avenue and died there. Another version is that some friends offered her a ride home because they saw this fight with her boyfriend and they were in an accident where the driver and the other passengers ended up with minor injuries. And Mary, for whatever reason, she ended up with internal injuries bad enough that she died right there. She was buried in Resurrection Cemetery. In about 1934, people started to see this young woman near the cemetery. She was just there visually, and she, would try to approach cars and generally just linger about. So in the early days, she was a little bit less hands-on. It looks like she decided to have a bit more fun with it later on, as one does. And that seems to have started in 1939. Jerry Palis is a really famous experience. He met a quiet blonde woman at the dance hall. They danced. So he obviously spoke to her. He had to ask her to dance. They had things to say while they were dancing. So, there was speaking. He physically held her to dance. They were dancing close so he could smell her, touch her, hear her. All of his sensory information told him that she was really there, according to the input he was getting. The only thing that I thought was memorably strange, and this was only in hindsight, was that she felt ice cold when he touched her. That can be kind of explained away in that circumstance because some people just run hotter than others, and he wasn't really for strangeness. He just met a girl. Oh, her hands are a little bit cold. It just wasn't that odd. When the dance ended, though, she asked for a ride home. Gentleman, he acquiesced. Of course, he's going to take her home, make sure she gets there safely. She gave him an address, but this was before you could just pop it into the GPS. So she also gave directions as they drove. Where she took him was not the address that she had given him. She directed him down Archer Avenue toward Resurrection Cemetery. They got to the gates, and she's still in the car. She actually asked to be let out of the car, which he did. He pulled over when she asked, went to open the door for her when she asked, and he watched her start to walk across the grass toward gates. And I can imagine he was pretty confused, and she just vanished, just gone. And so he remembered the address later on, maybe the next day, but at some point later. And he was still thinking about the situation, which I probably would be as well. A few days later, he went back to the exact address she'd given him and was told by the woman who lived there, who definitely not this woman, that no one fitting his date's description lived at that address. So, he was talking, she's at the door, and he's kind of on the front porch. He can look over her shoulder and he sees this large, prominent, framed picture of the girl he had spent the evening with. So he asks about it because, why are you hiding her? And he was told that she had died years earlier. Sightings continued with varying degrees of contact reports from her, but there weren't any that were quite as involved as Jerry's or, as detailed in the documentation, maybe. In 1951, a driver claimed a young woman in a white dress he had picked up just silently disappeared from his back seat as they approached the Resurrection Cemetery entrance. In the 1960s, there were several reports from young men who danced with a pale, quiet blonde woman at the Willowbrook Ballroom who just disappeared in front of them at some point at the end of the evening. So maybe after dancing, maybe in their car on the way, or some of them, like they made it all the way to the cemetery and then she's just gone. There was a folklorist that is the reason, have a lot of these stories to tell. Richard Crowe went about collecting these experiences in the late 20th century to, kind of document her goings and her coming and goings. And he came away with more than 3 dozen substantiated reports. In 1976, a motorist passing Resurrection Cemetery saw a woman locked inside the gates after dark. And that's pretty concerning to see. She looked upset about it. She's trying to get out. She's at the bars. And so she was very concerned. She called the police. Officers came to let the frantic woman out, but no one was there. And the bars to the main gate had been bent outward from each other. Supposedly, there were handprints marked on the metal. The gate has been changed since then. And the story is that it's to hide those creepy marks. I don't know. I couldn't find any pictures of the gates. The sightings did continue, though, into the 80s. Several people just reported seeing her along that road, so there's not any more dancing. At that point, maybe it wasn't there anymore. I'm not sure. But in 1989, Janet Kalal was in full panic mode, saying that she had just hit a woman with her car who'd run out in front of her. She stopped as fast as she could and she got out to check on her, but there was nobody there. There was no body. Um, when she looked back at it, she's like, there was no impact or sound. She just saw a woman in front of her car and then not in front of her car as she was stopping as quickly as she could. So she didn't note the strangeness of the lack of impact or sound because the visual simulation that she was getting told her that someone needed help, but nobody was there. The woman in front of the car was just gone rather than under her wheels. And the vanishing hitchhiker is kind of a classic ghost story that we can find in a lot of places with some variations. Like Jack brought up, oh, it was the cemetery where I was near. Or, I think in California there were some vanishing hitchhiker stories. It's a common trope. Resurrection Mary does stand out in because there have been so many very consistent independent reports over nearly a century. There are still reports that come in through the 2000s, but she's not been in the newspaper since the late 80s. They sort of appear online now, which is that's just where everything is, I suppose. In October 2024, a delivery driver posted that he saw a young woman in an old-fashioned white dress on Archer Avenue. She looked like she needed help, so he pulled over. By the time he stopped, she had vanished. That's not a long time, just a few seconds. But looking at the pictures, because I wanted to see how open was this space, it seems like a pretty open stretch. So it's not like there were places she could have like ducked down and been hiding. The legend is still circulating locally, and people continue to claim sightings regardless of verification. No one has been hurt in either the verified or unverified sightings. So she's scared people and she's confused them, maybe broken a few hearts, poor Jerry, but she has been mostly harmless. And that is what I've got about Resurrection Mary. Are you familiar with that area, Chuck?
That area, no. It's you go down south and curve a little bit towards the west. It is oddly in the same direction, although I think too far south from the O'Leary barn that started the Great Chicago Fire. But
I think what I wanted to say about Resurrection Mary is, in some ways, I believe it's a cautionary tale about speeding, about driving on those dark plains and those dark roads.
Folklore has that element of watch out for this. This could be you. So yeah, it definitely could be that the fear of the results of speeding, not paying attention to your surroundings because, she was hurt by leaving her space upset. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of elements of here's the danger and here's how you should watch out for them. It also, I mean, people have seen her. So I definitely don't want to negate any of those experiences. It's really up to you to decide if this is just a cautionary tale or if Resurrection Mary is wandering about.
In the end, Chicago is full of many, many strange things, many more than these.
Oh, yeah, there was a plethora of things to choose from.
It was kind of great having all of the neat things to study, and kind of hard to figure out which ones I wanted to, because I considered Old Juliet. There were a few that I had to narrow it down.
Yeah, the Corncob Man wasn't on my radar. So the listener suggestion to do that one, I loved that because, it was something I hadn't even thought of. And so now
Yeah.
we got to learn more about that. So thank you, Leonard, and thank you definitely to Addison and Courtney and Susan. That was lovely.
Yes, thank you guys so much.
So our next state is Indiana.
Yep.
Zandi, do you have anything in mind for Indiana?
I don't yet. I've only been to Indiana for Gen Con, so I didn't see anything really spooky while I was there, other than, Gen Con. I mean, other
Well,
than Brazilian steakhouses, I don't really know anything about Indiana, but that part was great. Fogo was amazing.
yeah, I don't think Fogo de Chao counts as Indiana.
I liked it. What I mean, Gen Con was fun too. I got to meet some of my favorite authors like Margaret Weiss,
Nice.
Tracy Hickman. Got to see my favorite artist, Ruth Thompson. So thank you, Jack, for joining us. And thank you all for listening. We will see you next time in Indiana.
And if I see a shadow person, I probably won't let you know because they'll have taken me.
Well, I guess we'll know what has happened to Jack if we don't hear from him again. But thank you for listening. And
Right.
bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.